What would you do? If the man waiting at your blind date turned out to be your billionaire boss, would you walk away or sit down, pretending the universe wasn't laughing in your face? For Clara Hayes, a brilliant but guarded financial analyst in Seattle, that one dinner was supposed to be harmless, a favor to her best friend. But what began as an awkward coincidence soon unraveled into something deeper, a collision between power and vulnerability, ambition and the simple, terrifying risk of love. Behind the glass towers of Sterling and West, secrets waited, a past betrayal, a woman who knew how to twist truth into control, and a man, Ethan Sterling, who built his empire on discipline but had forgotten how to trust. Two people, both haunted by old wounds, both standing at the edge of something real. But can love survive when fear has been calling the shots for so long? When control shatters and truth finally surfaces? Who will they become, the protectors of their pride or the witnesses of their own hearts? Stay with us, like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories for this unforgettable tale of courage, redemption, and the choice to love when it's easier to hide. Rain drifted down the glass towers of downtown Seattle, turning the city into a watercolor of lights and motion. From the 32nd floor of Sterling and West, the world below looked soft, blurred, almost kind. Inside, the office was nearly silent. Desks slept under the glow of computer screens gone dark, except for one, Clara Hayes's. She sat with her sleeves rolled up, a pen between her fingers, eyes fixed on the spreadsheet glowing before her. The numbers were steady companions, predictable, obedient, honest. She liked them that way. Tonight, however, something didn't add up. A decimal in the quarterly report seemed too perfect, a neatness that whispered trouble. She leaned closer, adjusted her glasses, and made a note in the margin. The clock on her monitor read 9:47 p.m. The hum of the air system and the rhythmic tap of her keyboard filled the empty space. Beyond the glass, rain trailed like tiny comets down the window. In that reflection, Clara caught a glimpse of herself, dark hair twisted into a low bun, pale skin lit by the blue light of the screen, the quiet discipline of a woman who had made peace with solitude. Her phone buzzed. A message from Sophie Larson flashed. "Are you still there?" "Almost done," Clara replied. "You said that 2 hours ago. Get out of there. Hayes, I will. Eventually, tomorrow night, 7, Blue Lantern Bistro. You promised?" Clara smiled despite herself. Sophie never gave up. The two had met 15 years ago, back when ambition was still a kind of adventure. Sophie had become the friend who refused to let life turn gray. She finished her note, closed the report, and gathered her things. As she turned off the desk lamp, the room folded into shadow. The elevator ride down was slow, the music faint and hollow. In the lobby, the security guard, Thomas, nodded to her. "Long day again. Miss Hayes' quarterly reports," she said. "And rain." He chuckled. "That'll do it." Outside, the drizzle had thickened. Clara pulled her coat tight and walked briskly to her car, puddles glinting under streetlights. Traffic was light. The city felt half asleep. When she reached her apartment, a small but carefully kept space overlooking Lake Union, she set her bag down with a sigh. The air smelled faintly of lavender. A photo of her parents sat atop the upright piano by the window. Dust had gathered on the keys. She hadn't played since the funeral. She brewed a cup of chamomile tea, changed into a soft sweater, and sank onto the couch. Her cat, Newton, hopped into her lap, purring as if to remind her she wasn't entirely alone. She stroked his fur absently, her thoughts drifting. 8 years had passed since she'd decided it was safer not to need anyone. Safety had become her habit, the walls she built around her heart, the routines she never questioned. The phone rang. Sophie's voice, warm and impatient, burst through. "Before you start with your excuses, I already told him you're coming, Sophie. Listen, he's decent, normal. He reads, he laughs. He's not a criminal. That's a low bar. Just dinner. Clara, you can handle one dinner." There was laughter in Sophie's tone, but also affection. Clara stared at the rain sliding down her window. She thought of her empty weekends, her muted piano, the quiet that never seemed to end. "Fine," she said softly. "One dinner," Sophie squealed. "Tomorrow, 7 sharp. And wear something that says I'm open to joy, not I work in finance." When the call ended, the apartment fell quiet again. Newton looked up, blinking. "A blind date?" Clara murmured. "What could possibly go wrong?" She smiled, small and uncertain. Outside, the rain eased to a steady whisper against the glass, a rhythm like breathing. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine that something in her life might change. The rain had followed her there. It always did. By the time Clara Hayes pushed open the door to the Blue Lantern Bistro, her umbrella was dripping, her heels slick, and her heart was drumming louder than the jazz humming through the speakers. The restaurant was the kind that whispered money, not in gold or marble, but in how the waiters moved quietly, efficiently, like shadows trained in elegance. Candlelight flickered on the dark wood tables, and the windows trembled softly beneath the rain. She checked her phone again. 7:03 p.m. Sophie had texted 15 minutes ago. He's already there. Blue tie. Corner table by the window. Clara exhaled, smoothed her navy dress, and scanned the room. Her gaze landed on him. Tall, composed. A blue tie catching the light like a sliver of sky amid all the gray. And then her breath caught. Ethan Sterling. Her boss. Her billionaire boss. For a split second, her mind refused to make sense of it. The man who ran Sterling and West. The man who rarely smiled and never wasted words, was sitting at a table meant for a blind date. No, impossible. He looked up at that moment, as if feeling her stare. Recognition flickered across his face, a brief, sharp jolt of surprise followed by something quieter. He stood, straightening his jacket. "Clara," his voice was smooth, even, but his eyes betrayed confusion. "I didn't expect—" "Neither did I," she managed. This must be a mistake." The waiter, unaware of the storm brewing between them, appeared with 2 menus. "Table for 2, Ethan's hand hesitated before gesturing. "Yes? Thank you?" Clara should have walked out. She knew that. But curiosity, or maybe shock, anchored her in place. She sat, carefully setting her purse down, every movement deliberate. Across from her, Ethan adjusted his cufflinks. "It seems Sophie Larson and my brother Ryan have been conspiring." Her eyes widened. "Ryan, your brother?" He nodded, almost smiling. "Apparently, your friend thought I needed to relax more." Ryan took that as a challenge. The absurdity of it broke through her nerves. A small laugh escaped her, quiet but genuine. "So they set us up, blindly, efficiently." Ethan's mouth curved slightly. "You'd expect less from our employees." The tension eased, if only slightly. They ordered wine, though Clara wasn't sure she'd drink it. Her palms still felt damp, and her heartbeat hadn't quite returned to normal, For a while, conversation danced on neutral ground: the weather, the endless rain, Seattle's talent for gloom. But slowly, it drifted deeper. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked, surprising herself. Miss what? The quiet? Before everything was glass offices and headlines? Ethan paused. His gaze dropped to the candle flame between them. "Every day," he said softly. There it was, a crack in the armor. Just a glimpse, but enough for Clara to see he wasn't made entirely of steel. He studied her in return. "And you've been with Sterling and West for, what, 5 years, 6?" she said. "And no, I don't miss quiet. I've had plenty." Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The waiter arrived with food neither of them had truly wanted. The air between them had shifted, still professional, but warmer, almost fragile. Clara found herself relaxing in small increments, laughing once or twice at Ethan's dry humor. She noticed the faint dimple near his jaw when he smiled, the way his voice lowered when he spoke about books, or his mother's garden, or the sound of rain on his cabin roof near the coast. He wasn't what she expected a billionaire to be, and maybe she wasn't what he expected either. Halfway through dinner, a couple at the next table began arguing low, bitter words muffled by the music. Clara looked away, uncomfortable. Ethan followed her gaze. "Funny," he said quietly. "People spend half their lives chasing connection, the other half trying to escape it." She glanced at him. "Which half are you in?" His answer was slow. "That depends on the day." For the first time, she smiled without guarding it. The clock above the bar struck 9. Outside, the rain had turned to mist, wrapping the city in silver. When the waiter brought the check, Ethan reached for it automatically. "I can," she began. "Please," he said, not in arrogance, but courtesy. "Consider it an apology for the ambush." She hesitated, then nodded. As they stood, Ethan picked up his coat. "Let me walk you out." They stepped into the night. The street glistened under the soft hum of rain. Traffic hissed by, reflections bending across the pavement. Clara opened her umbrella, but the wind caught it, flipping it backward with a metallic snap. Ethan reached out instinctively, steadying it, and her. For a moment, his hand lingered on her arm, warm, solid, unexpected. They both froze, caught between propriety and something else neither could name. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded, voice low. "Get home safe, Clara." She turned toward her car, heart beating an unfamiliar rhythm. When she looked back, he was still there, standing beneath the awning, hands in pockets, watching her go. In another life, she thought, he might have followed her to the car. In another life, she might have let him. But this was their world, one of walls, rules, and unspoken boundaries. Still, as she drove away, she realized her reflection in the window was smiling. And for the first time in years, she didn't quite mind the rain. The city stretched beneath him like a circuit board, each light a pulse, each street a vein. From the penthouse balcony, Ethan Sterling could see almost everything: the harbor lights flickering through the mist, the Ferris wheel spinning lazily, the ghostly shimmer of the Sound. It was past midnight, and he should have been asleep. But sleep was a luxury that men like him never quite learned to afford. The wine from dinner sat untouched on the counter, the half-unbuttoned shirt, the blue tie now draped over a chair. It all looked like evidence of someone trying, briefly, to live a normal life. He loosened his collar, leaning against the glass, watching the fog curl along the skyline. somewhere down there? Clara Hayes was probably doing what she always did, working late, double-checking numbers, building her walls one spreadsheet at a time. The dinner replayed in his mind like a song stuck on repeat. Her laughter quiet, hesitant, as though she didn't quite remember how. The way her eyes softened when he mentioned his mother's garden. The way she hid discomfort behind poise. He hadn't expected to notice any of it. He certainly hadn't wanted to. He poured himself a drink and walked to the piano by the window. A Steinway, untouched for months. He sat, pressed one key, then another. The sound felt foreign, too intimate, too honest. It brought back a memory he'd buried deep the last time he'd played for someone. Victoria Hale. She had been everything that looked right on paper, elegant, brilliant, media darling. Their engagement had been the crown jewel of Seattle society. Investors toasted their power union. Magazines printed their photos like royalty. And for a while, he'd believed the illusion that partnership could mean safety. Until the leaks began, confidential merger plans, executive strategies, every secret he'd shared with her used against him. By the time the board realized the breach, it was too late. Sterling and West had lost millions, 3 clients, and most of his trust in human decency. He'd found out about her betrayal from the front page of the Seattle Tribune. Victoria hadn't stolen money. She'd stolen something worse belief. He took a long sip of whiskey, the burn grounding him, even now. Years later. The wound itched when he least expected it. Loneliness had become easier than risk. It was simpler to build empires than to build trust. He set the glass down and stared again at the city, his reflection merging with the lights beyond the glass. Clara Hayes, he murmured. The name felt dangerous in his mouth. Intelligent, steady. Exactly the kind of woman who wouldn't fall for charm, and therefore, the kind who could undo him if he wasn't careful. He turned off the lights and stood for a long moment in the dark. The city glowed faintly below. "She's the last person I should care about," he whispered. Across town, in her small apartment overlooking Lake Union. Clara lay awake with the same restless energy. The night rain had turned to mist, smudging the lights outside into halos. Newton slept at her feet, tail flicking in dream rhythm. Clara stared at the ceiling, unable to quiet her thoughts. Dinner had gone, strangely well, too well. Ethan had been polite, yes, but not cold, thoughtful, curious, even vulnerable. In fleeting moments when he forgot to be the CEO everyone feared. She'd seen a man who looked exhausted by perfection, and she'd recognized something loneliness. Maybe that mirrored her own, but that was dangerous territory. She rolled onto her side, eyes landing on the framed photo atop her piano. Her parents, smiling under the summer sun. The picture taken weeks before the accident. The piano had been her father's refuge. After he died, she'd closed it like a wound and never opened it again. Her mother's voice sometimes drifted back in dreams. "You can survive anything, Clara. Just don't mistake surviving for living." And then there was Michael. That name still hurt to think about. The man who had taught her the cost of trusting the wrong person. He had been charming, older, brilliant, a mentor who turned into something more. She'd believed every promise until the truth arrived not from his mouth, but from his wife's on a cold February night, standing at her doorstep, fury and heartbreak in equal measure. The humiliation had burned through her like acid. Since then, Clara had built her life around logic, not longing, work, not wonder, safety, not surprise, not yet. Tonight, over candlelight and rain, something had cracked. Ethan's gaze had been steady, not predatory. His questions had felt like genuine curiosity, not tactics. He'd remembered details, listened, even smiled at her dry humor. And now that same smile haunted her because it was the kind that made her want to believe again. She hated that. Clara got out of bed, padded barefoot to the kitchen, poured herself water she didn't need. The clock on the microwave blinked 1:42. She leaned against the counter, eyes unfocused. "What are you doing?" she whispered to herself. "He's your boss. The last person you should ever—" She didn't finish the sentence. Back in the living room, the piano sat waiting, silent. On impulse, she lifted the lid. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. She pressed one middle C, then another. The notes filled the air like ghosts waking from long sleep. She played quietly, almost shyly, until the sound grew stronger, steadier. Outside, rain tapped against the window like applause. For the first time in years, she let the music find her. And somewhere across the city, a man who had stopped believing in connection sat alone at his piano, doing the same. Different keys, same melody, same ache. When Clara finally stopped, her heart felt both lighter and more afraid. She closed the lid gently, whispering, "He's the last person I should care about." But her reflection in the dark window didn't look convinced. Monday mornings had a particular sound at Sterling and West, the low hum of conversation, the clack of heels on tile, the faint hiss of espresso machines fueling ambition. For most employees, it was routine. For Clara Hayes, it was armor. She arrived early, as always, coffee in one hand, laptop in the other. She moved through the lobby like someone who had mastered invisibility. The night's rain had left a sheen on the sidewalks, the air smelling faintly of cedar and caffeine. By 8:30, the floor was alive with motion phones ringing, printers humming, voices layered over the steady rhythm of business. Clara was reviewing a client report when the first shrill note of the alarm cut through the building. At first, no one moved. Then, as the lights began to flash, the floor descended into mild chaos. "Is that real?" someone asked. "Probably a drill," another muttered, grabbing their phone but not their coat. Clara sighed, saving her work. Of course. Monday. She stepped into the hallway just as Ethan Sterling appeared from his glass-walled office, calm as ever, despite the alarm's insistence. His suit jacket was off. Sleeves rolled up, CEO mode downgraded to human under pressure. "Let's go," he said to the cluster of employees. "Use the stairwell if possible. Stay calm." He caught Clara's eye briefly. A flicker of recognition, maybe amusement. Then he turned to usher the last few interns out. Clara waited for the crowd to thin before heading toward the elevators. She hated crowded stairwells. The claustrophobia. The echo of footsteps like thunder. One elevator had just opened. She slipped inside, pressing the lobby button. At the last second, before the doors could close, a hand reached in. Ethan stepped inside. "Oh," she said, startled. "I thought you'd taken the stairs." "I was making sure everyone else did," he replied, half smiling. Apparently, leadership comes with irony. The doors sealed, and the elevator hummed into motion for 3 floors. Silence. Only the sound of the alarm fading as they descended. Then, with a jolt, the elevator stopped. Lights flickered once, then steadied to a dim emergency glow. Clara blinked. "You've got to be kidding." Ethan pressed the intercom. "Control, this is Ethan Sterling." We seem to be stuck between floors 27 and 26. A crackling voice answered, "Apologies, sir. False alarm tripped the system. Give us 5 minutes." He released the button, exhaling through his nose. 5 minutes, he repeated. Could be worse. Worse, she said, crossing her arms. We could be in here with the interns. She laughed before she could stop herself, the sound surprising both of them. He turned, eyebrows raised slightly. That was almost optimism, he said. Don't get used to it. They stood there, the hum of the emergency lights filling the silence between them. Clara shifted, then looked at him. So, this is what they mean by team building, trapped in an elevator with your boss during a fire alarm. Ethan chuckled softly, the sound low and genuine. Remind me to cancel next quarter's retreat. This seems more effective. Another pause, comfortable. This time, Clara studied him under the muted light, without the polished armor of meetings and titles. He looked different, softer. Somehow, the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, the creases near his eyes from too many late nights and too little sleep. She caught herself staring and quickly looked away. You're not panicking, he observed. I'm not much of a panicker. Good. Because if you were, I'd have to pretend to be reassuring. Her mouth twitched. That's what leaders do. Not the good ones. The good ones tell the truth. The elevator's stuck. We'll survive. That's the truth. She glanced sideways. And the great ones. He thought for a moment. They make you forget the walls. The air between them shifted, light, charged, fleeting. Then the elevator lurched softly, beginning its slow descent again. Both released a breath neither had realized they were holding. When the doors opened to the lobby, a small crowd had gathered security, facilities, a few curious employees. The alarm had stopped. Someone called out. All clear, Ethan gestured for Clara to exit first. After you, Miss Hayes. You've handled your first corporate crisis with composure. She gave him a wry look. Technically, it's my third. The first two involved actual fire. Then I'll trust your judgment next time, he said, lips curving faintly. Outside, the drizzle had returned, faint and cold. They stood under the awning, the chaos of evacuation dissolving behind them. Well, she said, adjusting her coat. I guess that's one way to start a Monday. Effective, though perhaps not scalable, he replied. Coffee my apology for the inconvenience, Clara hesitated. The offer sounded innocent enough, but the idea of coffee with him felt dangerously personal. I should get back to my desk, she said. Deadlines? Of course. He nodded once, stepping aside as she walked past. For a moment, she caught his reflection in the glass, watching her go. Thoughtful, unreadable. Later that afternoon, Sophie leaned against the doorway of Clara's cubicle, holding 2 coffees. So, she began. How was the elevator of destiny? Clara didn't look up from her screen. Routine malfunction? Routine? You and Ethan Sterling? Alone for 10 minutes? Come on. That's practically a rom-com setup. Clara sighed. It was fine. We talked. He was polite? Polite? Sophie grinned. Girl, polite from him is like flattery from anyone else. I've seen the man fire people with less warmth than he gives you. That's ridiculous. Sophie took a slow sip of coffee. So is pretending you didn't enjoy it. Clara's fingers froze over her keyboard. The memory of his laugh, low, genuine, unguarded, flashed through her mind. She forced it away. This is work, Soph. Nothing else. Sure, Sophie said, smirking. And I only drink coffee for the antioxidants. When Sophie left, Clara leaned back, staring at the numbers on her screen without seeing them. Her pulse had quickened again. Unreasonably so. She told herself it was adrenaline from the alarm. That was all. Yet, when she caught a glimpse of Ethan later that day across the hall, calm, composed, blue tie perfectly knotted, her breath caught for just a second too long, and deep inside, beneath all her practiced reason, a quiet thought whispered, unwelcome and unstoppable. You're crossing lines you promised you wouldn't. The next morning began like any other, until the screens went black. It started with a flicker. A few computers froze mid-calculation, then rebooted without command. Within minutes, murmurs spread across the 32nd floor. Phones lit up. It sprinted past with pale faces and half-finished coffees. Something was wrong. Something big. Clara Hayes had just returned from a meeting when her inbox vanished before her eyes. The cursor blinked, then a red message filled her monitor. Unauthorized access detected. Systems locked for protection. Her stomach tightened. Around her, the office rippled with panic questions, theories, fear. She stood, scanning the room for someone who might know what was happening. And then, through the glass, she saw him. Ethan Sterling moved across the floor like the eye of a storm calm, precise, already in command. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His presence pulled the chaos into focus. Everyone, step away from your computers, he said evenly. Disconnect external drives. It's isolating the network. The crowd obeyed, relief mingling with tension. Clara watched as he exchanged rapid words with the head of cybersecurity, his jaw tightening with every update. Within minutes, the message rippled through every department Sterling and West had been breached. Sensitive client data partnership contracts, financial projections, pending mergers was possibly compromised. Millions of dollars and reputations hung in the balance. Clara felt her chest tighten. This wasn't a simple glitch. This was an attack. Ms. Hayes, a voice called. She turned to see David Klein, head of IT, hurrying toward her. Mr. Sterling needs you in the boardroom, Sabadat. He said you're the only one who can interpret the integrity logs. Her pulse quickened. I'll be right there. Inside the boardroom. Tension buzzed like static. Half the screens were dark, the rest filled with code and scrolling error messages. Ethan stood at the head of the table. Sleeves rolled, tie loosened, eyes sharp. Clara, he said, looking up as she entered. Glad you're here? Tell me what you need. He gestured to the monitors. They're tracing the breach, but the pattern doesn't match anything we've seen. It's surgical. Someone knew exactly where to hit. She moved closer, scanning the data logs. Her mind clicked into analysis mode, the one place where fear couldn't reach her. These signatures, she murmured, look familiar. Not from our end, but from a third-party interface? Vendor access? Maybe? Ethan leaned in beside her, his cologne faint but grounding. Can we isolate it? Yes, if we can find the point of injection. He smiled grimly. Then let's find it. Hours blurred. The outside world faded into the background. The hum of rain, the glow of monitors, the low murmur of strategy meetings behind closed doors. The company had gone into lockdown. PR was already drafting statements no one wanted to release. Through it all, Clara worked like a machine, methodical, relentless, every keystroke a step toward control. Ethan matched her pace, taking calls, issuing directives, returning every few minutes to check on progress. Once, when she looked up from the data stream, she caught him watching her not with the authority of a CEO, but with something closer to respect. "You don't panic easily," he said quietly. "I leave that to the amateurs." He gave a brief laugh, the sound soft against the hum of computers. "Good, because we're running out of professionals." By dusk, the office had emptied except for the crisis team. Boxes of takeout littered the tables. Coffee cups multiplied. Clara's hair had slipped from its bun. Strands framed her face as she leaned closer to the screen. Eyes narrowed in concentration. Ethan reappeared, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Truce," he said, offering one. "I'm told caffeine counts as gratitude." She accepted with a faint smile. "Then thank you." He sat across from her, scanning the real-time logs. "You were right," he said. "The attack originated through a vendor interface, Hail System." Clara froze. "Hail Systems as in yes," he said, his tone darkening. "Victoria's company." For a moment, neither spoke. The glow from the monitors reflected in his eyes cold, sharp light. Clara's voice was quiet. "Do you think she—" "I don't know." He cut in. "And until I do, we assume nothing." But she could see it, the flicker of anger, the ghost of betrayal resurfacing behind his composure. She wanted to reach out, to say something human, but the air between them was already too charged professionally, emotionally, dangerously. Instead, she turned back to her screen. "Then we keep going." They did. By midnight, the breach was contained. The damage was still unclear, but the bleeding had stopped. When Clara finally leaned back, exhausted, Ethan was still beside her, coat draped over a chair, tie forgotten, his expression unreadable. "You saved us tonight," he said softly. "I did my job." "No," he said, meeting her eyes. "You did more than that." Her throat tightened. She looked away, busying herself with shutting down the terminal. Compliments from him were rare. They felt heavier, meant more. As she stood to leave, he caught her voice again. "Clara." She turned. "Thank you." 2 words, simple, but spoken with a kind of sincerity that unsettled her more than the entire night's chaos. "Get some rest," she said, forcing a lightness she didn't feel. "You look like you fought a war." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I have." Outside, the building was dark except for the glow of emergency lights. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and gleaming under street lamps. Clara paused by the glass doors, staring at the city she barely knew anymore. She should have felt relief. Instead, all she felt was the lingering echo of his voice, steady, calm, grateful. Admiration tugged at something deeper, something she'd promised herself to bury. And with it came fear, the quiet, familiar kind, that whispered she was getting too close. She wrapped her coat tighter and stepped into the night, trying to convince herself that the pounding in her chest was just adrenaline. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. The following morning, Sterling and West's boardroom felt different. The air was sharper, the tension more deliberate, like a stage before the curtain rises. Every executive sat straighter than usual, their expressions guarded, voices clipped. Word had spread overnight the breach was serious. External consultants were being brought in. Clara Hayes entered quietly, laptop in hand, coffee forgotten halfway down the hall. She noticed Ethan standing near the floor-to-ceiling window, phone pressed to his ear, posture rigid, even from across the room. She could sense the controlled anger in the way he spoke. "Yes," he said. "Bring her in. Today." He hung up, jaw tightening for a moment, before turning back to the table. His voice was calm again, professional. "We'll be joined by a cybersecurity specialist. She's handled large-scale data compromises before." The door opened. Every head turned. Victoria Hale walked in like someone who still owned the room. Her heels clicked against the marble, perfectly measured, her suit charcoal gray, tailored fit with surgical precision. Even her smile was a weapon, polished to look harmless. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her tone smooth as silk over glass. "I came as soon as I got Ethan's call." Ethan's expression didn't change, but the muscles in his jaw shifted just slightly. "Thank you for coming." "Victoria." The sound of her name felt heavy in the air. Clara tried not to stare. She'd seen pictures, old press photos from when Victoria and Ethan were the IT couple of Seattle finance. But in person, Victoria was more striking. Not because of beauty, though she had that too, but because of control. Every gesture, every glance, seemed engineered for advantage. Victoria's eyes swept the room, taking inventory. When they landed on Clara, something flickered: recognition, curiosity, then calculation. "And you must be Clara Hayes," she said, voice perfectly polite. "I've read your reports. Impressive work during the crisis." Clara stood a little straighter. "Thank you." "Ethan always did attract brilliant people to his teams," Victoria added, her tone light but edged. He used to say competence was his love language. The room went still for a heartbeat too long. Ethan's gaze flicked toward Clara, then back to the files in front of him. "Let's focus on containment," he said flatly. "Victoria." "I'll have Ite forward the forensic data." "Of course," she said, smiling again, this time softer. Old habits, right, always business first. As she sat beside him, Clara felt an odd twist in her chest, an instinctive discomfort, a sense of being both observed and measured. The meeting continued. Charts, timelines, hypotheses. Victoria spoke with precision, her tone authoritative, her confidence effortless. She was good, too good. And every few minutes, she glanced toward Clara, as if assessing how far she could push without breaking civility. After an hour, Ethan dismissed the group to coordinate with IT. Only Clara remained, gathering her papers when Victoria's voice floated casually across the table. "You know," she said, "Ethan used to spend nights like these pacing the apartment, worrying about the company. I told him once that leadership was just a slow kind of self-destruction." Clara froze. "I'm sure he's changed since then." Victoria smiled faintly. "You think so? Men like him don't change. They adapt." She looked up, eyes narrowing just enough to suggest amusement or warning. "You seem smart, Clara. Careful, that's good." Sterling men have a way of pulling people into their orbit. Before Clara could respond, Ethan re-entered the room, a folder in hand. "Victoria, I'll have the encrypted log sent to your team." "Thank you." She stood, brushing invisible dust from her jacket. "It's nice working with you again." His expression was unreadable. "Let's just solve the problem." When she left, the silence that followed was almost physical. Clara forced a neutral tone. "She's very capable." "She is," Ethan said simply. Then, after a pause, "and very dangerous." Clara hesitated, unsure how to respond. He didn't elaborate and she didn't ask, but the words lingered. By late afternoon, the company was in full recovery mode. Clara worked from the analytics lab, filtering through data logs, matching timestamps, cross-referencing vendor access. She tried to focus, but her concentration slipped every time she caught fragments of conversation through the half-open door of the adjacent conference room. Ethan and Victoria were inside. Their voices were muffled, but not entirely lost. "You always assume the worst of me," Victoria said, her tone soft but cutting. "Experience taught me to." Ethan replied, "You think I'd sabotage your company? After everything, don't play innocent. I'm not. But maybe if you'd trusted me back then." Clara stepped away from her desk, pulse quickening. She didn't want to listen, but she couldn't make herself move either. Victoria's voice lowered, almost tender. "I didn't come back to hurt you, Ethan. You called me. Remember that?" Then a softer sound, laughter, a sigh, Clara couldn't tell. She turned quickly, pretending to review a spreadsheet as footsteps approached. The door opened. Victoria emerged first, composed, unflustered. Ethan followed a moment later, his expression impassive. "Ms. Hayes," he said, voice measured. "Can you run an integrity check on vendor log files from the past 6 months?" "Already started," she replied, though her throat felt tight. "Good," he said, giving a brief nod before walking away. Victoria lingered by the doorway, smiling faintly. "He trusts you," she said quietly. "That's rare." Clara looked up, uncertain how to respond. "Just be careful with that," Victoria added, her eyes cool. "Trust is currency for men like Ethan. They spend it fast." She walked away, leaving behind a faint trail of perfume and unease. Clara exhaled slowly, turning back to her monitor, but the numbers swam. Her logical mind told her to dismiss it, to stay focused, stay professional. But another part of her, the one that remembered betrayal and blurred lines, whispered caution. She thought of Ethan's tone in that room, the way Victoria's words had landed like old, familiar bruises. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe men like him didn't change. And yet Clara couldn't shake the image of him last night. Sleeves rolled up, steady hands guiding chaos into order. The sincerity in his voice when he thanked her. Which version was real, the man she saw, or the man Victoria remembered by the time she shut down her computer? The office was almost empty. Outside, dusk had turned the city into a watercolor of gold and gray. Clara paused by the window, the reflection of the skyline merging with her own. For the first time since the breach, she didn't trust what she knew. And beneath the fatigue, beneath the logic and the fear, one thought kept circling, quiet, persistent, dangerous. What if I'm the next mistake he makes? The following Thursday began with sunlight rare for Seattle and attention Clara couldn't name. It was one of those mornings when everything looked ordinary on the surface, yet something beneath it hummed out of tune. By 9, the office had settled into its usual rhythm. Keyboards clicked, phones rang, printers hummed, and Clara Hayes sat at her desk, pretending to focus on a report she'd already read 3 times. The cyber attack investigation had slowed, but Victoria Hale's presence lingered in every hallway like perfume, subtle, pervasive, impossible to ignore. She'd barely slept the night before, turning over fragments of conversation she wished she hadn't overheard. Victoria's voice, Ethan's silence, that half laugh that might have meant nothing or everything. When her phone buzzed, she welcomed the distraction until she saw the message. Unknown number, a single photo. Her breath stopped. It was her and Ethan in the elevator during the fire drill. The emergency lights dim, their faces close. Laughter caught mid-moment. Beneath it, a caption, "Be careful who you trust." Clara's stomach dropped. She looked around instinctively, but no one seemed to notice. The marketing team chatted near the break room. Sophie's office door was closed. Nothing looked different. She saved the image, checked the timestamp, 2 days old. Someone inside the company must have taken it. Her pulse quickened. The implications hit fast: an executive and a subordinate, alone, smiling, out of context. It was innocent, but context rarely mattered in places built on power and perception. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. "You don't know who you're dealing with." No name, no sender ID, just words that turned her veins to ice. Clara stood, forcing her breathing steady. The logical part of her mind tried to take control. It could be a prank. Someone from IT. Maybe even Victoria. Testing boundaries. But the emotional part, the part that remembered humiliation, exposure, betrayal, was already spiraling. She deleted the messages, locked her phone, and went to the ladies' room. The mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized, composed, yes, but pale, eyes sharp with worry. "You're fine," she told herself. "You didn't do anything wrong." But that was the problem, wasn't it? Truth never stood a chance against rumor. By noon, the whispers had begun. Clara felt them in the way conversation stopped when she entered a room, in the glances that slid away too fast. A pair of interns giggled near the copier, one whispering, "I heard she's closer to the boss than people think." Sophie intercepted her in the hallway, concern etched across her face. "What's going on?" "People are acting weird." Clara forced a shrug. "Nothing. Just post-breach tension." "Clara," Sophie lowered her voice, "I've known you since college. Don't, it's nothing, me. Talk to me." Clara hesitated, then shook her head. "Not here." They retreated to the stairwell neutral territory, away from curious eyes. Clara handed her phone over, reopening the saved photo. Sophie's jaw dropped. Oh my God. Who sent this? No idea. Blocked number. Do you think? Sophie stopped herself. What? That Victoria might have something to do with it? Clara's heart clenched. I don't want to accuse anyone, but she's been watching. Sophie scrolled through the messages again. This isn't just gossip, Clara. This is sabotage. Someone's trying to make you look compromised. I know, Clara whispered. But how do I defend myself against something like this? I can't exactly go to HR and say, someone took a flattering photo? Sophie frowned. You have to tell Ethan. The idea hit like cold water. No, absolutely not. Why not? Because that's exactly how it'll look that I'm running to him for protection. I worked too hard to be taken seriously here. I won't become that woman. Sophie's expression softened. You mean the woman they whisper about behind her back? Clara nodded, throat tight. The one they assume slept her way into power. Sophie sighed, placing a hand on her shoulder. You're not her? I know, Clara said quietly. But they won't. That afternoon, Ethan called an impromptu meeting with the analytics team. Clara attended, sitting farther from him than usual. She kept her eyes on her notes, avoiding the warmth of his voice, the way he occasionally looked her way as if searching for reassurance. He sensed at her distance. He didn't ask, not there. But the change between them was impossible to miss. After the meeting, he caught up with her in the corridor. Clara, he said, lowering his tone. A word, she stopped, trying to steady her breathing. Of course. They stepped into his office. The door clicked shut. He studied her for a moment. "Did I do something, what you're different?" he said softly. "Since yesterday." Detached. Her hands gripped the file in front of her. "I've just been focused. That's not it." She hesitated, meeting his gaze. For a heartbeat. She considered telling him, showing him the photo, asking if he knew who might want to hurt them both. But then Victoria's voice from the boardroom replayed in her head, smooth, measured, poisonous. "Trust is currency for men like Ethan. They spend it fast." Clara looked away. "It's nothing. Really?" Ethan's brow furrowed. "You're sure? Yes?" He nodded slowly. "All right. But if something's wrong, you'll tell me." "I will," she said. He gave a faint, reluctant smile. "Good, because I trust you, Clara." The words hit harder than he intended. Trust. The one thing she didn't know if she still had to give. When she left his office, her pulse was still racing. She passed Victoria in the hallway, leaning casually against the glass railing. Phone in hand, smile faint but knowing. "Rough day?" she asked. Clara forced a polite tone. "Just busy." "Ah," Victoria said lightly. "That's what Ethan always says when he's hiding something." Clara froze for a fraction of a second. By the time she turned, Victoria was already walking away, her laughter echoing down the hall. That night, Clara sat in her apartment, the city glittering faintly through the windows. The photo still burned in her mind, the elevator, the smile, the warning. She poured herself a glass of wine she didn't want and scrolled through her work emails, pretending the world was still normal. But deep down, she knew the balance had shifted. Ethan trusted her. Victoria watched her. Someone, somewhere, was playing a game she didn't understand. And Clara, despite every instinct screaming, otherwise was starting to wonder if she'd already lost control of the story being written about her. By Friday morning, Clara Hayes had stopped checking her phone. Every vibration felt like a threat now, each buzz a reminder of that photograph, of eyes watching her from somewhere unseen. The office looked the same, but the atmosphere had shifted. It hummed with suspicion. She couldn't quite name but could feel pressing against her skin. The whispers hadn't stopped. At first, they were faint passing comments near the elevator, hushed voices by the coffee machine. Then came the looks, the kind that lasted a second too long. Curiosity, shading into judgment. She caught a fragment from two analysts outside the break room. "Do you think it's true?" one asked. The other shrugged. "Well, she was with him during the breach, all night." Clara froze mid-step. A hollow sound filled her ears, part heartbeat, part disbelief. By the time she reached her desk, her resolve had hardened. She couldn't live in ambiguity anymore. If there were whispers, if someone had planted that photo, if her reputation was slipping into someone else's narrative, she needed to confront the one person who could either end it or confirm her worst fears. Ethan Sterling. He was in his office, standing before the window with his back to her, suit jacket off, tension drawn tight across his shoulders. The skyline beyond him shimmered under thin sunlight, but the room felt cold. Clara knocked lightly, then stepped in without waiting for an answer. "We need to talk." Ethan turned, surprise flickering across his face at her tone. "Of course." Did you know there are rumors?" she interrupted. "About us?" He blinked, frowning. "Rumors in the office." People think she hesitated, forcing the words out. They think there's something between us. His jaw tightened. And where did you hear that? Everywhere, she said, voice rising despite herself. Hallways. Emails that stop when I enter the room. I don't have to hear it directly. I can feel it. Ethan set his hands on the desk, leaning forward. Clara, you know how people are. They look for stories. You've done nothing wrong. I received a photo, she said quietly. That made him freeze. She pulled her phone from her bag, opened the image, and placed it on his desk. The elevator, the blue tie, the laughter. He stared at it for a long moment, the muscle in his jaw flexing. Where did you get this anonymous number? She said. With a message, be careful who you trust. He exhaled sharply, anger flashing behind his calm. Victoria. Clara crossed her arms. You're sure she's done it before? When she wants control, she uses implication. Lies. This is her style. Then why is she still here? Clara demanded. Why is she working for us if you don't trust her? Ethan's expression darkened. Because the board demanded it. Because she's good at what she does? Or because you still let her in? Clara said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. The silence that followed was instant, sharp, irreversible. His eyes met hers, colder now. What does that mean? It means you called her back, she said. You gave her a seat at the table again? After everything she did to you, to this company? Why? He straightened, voice flattening. Because leadership isn't about pride, it's about necessity. Is that what you call it? Necessity? Ethan's temper cracked, just slightly. You think you understand what it costs to hold this place together, to keep 300 people employed while every reporter in the city is waiting for a misstep? You think I enjoy working beside someone who nearly destroyed me? I think you like control. She shot back. And you can't stand that someone else, especially me, might make you feel something you can't manage. He stepped around the desk, stopping just a few feet from her. What do you want from me? Clara. The question hit harder than it should have. She didn't answer right away. The words tangled in her throat, truth, fear, longing, all of it too dangerous to speak aloud. I wanted honesty, she said finally, voice quiet but trembling. But maybe that was naive. He stared at her, the anger in his face giving way to something rawer, hurt, regret, exhaustion. I have been honest. You're the one who's pulling away? Because I can't tell what's real anymore? She burst out. The late nights, the trust, the way you look at me, was that all strategy? Because if it was, I'd rather you just say it. Ethan's hand ran through his hair. He looked away, unable or unwilling to answer. I'm not your project, she said, more softly now. I'm not your distraction from whatever ghosts you haven't buried, Clara, he said, tone lower now. You're crossing a line. She laughed once, bitterly, funny, coming from you. The words landed like a slap. For a moment, neither moved. The air between them thickened, full of things they might have said if pride hadn't been louder than truth. Then Ethan turned toward the window, shoulders rigid. I think you should take the afternoon off. That was all. No defense, no explanation, no don't go. Something in her chest cracked not loudly, just enough for the pain to seep through. She nodded once, gathering her phone. You're right. I should. Her heels clicked across the hardwood as she left his office. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The elevator doors closed behind her, sealing the argument inside like smoke trapped in glass. Outside, the city air was damp and gray again, the illusion of morning light already gone. Clara walked without direction, her reflection blurring in every rain-slicked window she passed. She told herself she was angry at him, at Victoria, at the way power turned everything into performance. But beneath the anger was something smaller, more painful, disappointment. Because for a moment, she'd believed he might be different. That all his precision and self-control hid something human, something capable of care. She reached the waterfront, where the wind carried the scent of salt and diesel. The waves moved slow and heavy against the docks. She stood there for a long while, the city lights flickering behind her like stars too stubborn to die. Finally, she spoke aloud quietly, as if confessing to the water. I swore I'd never be a fool for love again. The wind swallowed the words, scattering them into the gray, but the ache remained. And somewhere, in the 32nd floor office she'd just left, a man stared at the same skyline, unable to decide whether to chase after her or let her go. The weekend settled over Seattle in a quiet drizzle, the kind of rain that didn't fall so much as it breathed across the city. Clara Hayes sat by her apartment window, staring at the muted skyline while her untouched coffee went cold beside her. The week had left her hollow. The photo, the rumors, the confrontation with Ethan replaying like a loop she couldn't escape. She had turned off her phone Friday night, desperate for silence. Now, as it buzzed softly on the table, she nearly ignored it. But then she saw the name on the screen. Eleanor Sterling. For a moment, she thought she'd misread it. Ethan's mother. They'd met once, briefly, at a company charity gala, an elegant woman with kind eyes and a spine of steel. Clara hesitated before answering. Mrs. Sterling Eleanor. Please? The older woman's voice came, gentle but firm. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. No. Not at all, Clara said automatically, though her heart had begun to thud in warning. I was wondering, Eleanor continued, if you might have time to meet me for coffee today. There's something I'd like to talk to you about. Woman to woman? Clara blinked, unsure how to respond. Of course. When in an hour, Eleanor said. There's a small cafe near the lake, the Maple House. You'll like it. Then, before Clara could ask anything more, the call ended. The Maple House was warm and bright, its windows fogged from the contrast between rain and steam. The air smelled of cinnamon and roasted beans, the kind of place where time slowed enough for truth to settle in. Eleanor was already there, seated near the corner, a porcelain cup in hand. Her silver hair framed her face neatly. Her posture was calm, assured. When Clara approached, Eleanor looked up with a small, knowing smile. You came... Thank you. I was surprised, Clara admitted, taking the seat across from her. I imagine you were, Eleanor said, her eyes steady but kind. You've had quite a week? Clara froze, unsure how to answer. Eleanor stirred her coffee slowly. Rumors move faster than facts in this town, and faster still in companies where ambition outpaces decency. Clara's throat tightened. So you've heard. I hear most things, Eleanor said. Not unkindly, especially when they involve my son. Clara lowered her gaze. I don't know what you've heard, but none of it is. Eleanor raised a gentle hand. I didn't ask to discuss gossip. I asked to discuss truth. There was something in her tone, patient, grounded, that made Clara exhale the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I know about the photograph," Eleanor said. "And I know who sent it." Clara looked up sharply. "You do?" Eleanor nodded. Victoria Hale has been playing these games for years. Manipulation wrapped in civility. When she and Ethan were engaged, she learned his fears the way an artist learns light, and she painted them against him. Clara's chest ached. "He never told me the full story." "He wouldn't," Eleanor said softly. "Ethan doesn't speak of wounds. He fortifies them. When Victoria betrayed him, she didn't just compromise a merger. She humiliated him publicly, leaked private letters to the press, twisted them into something scandalous. He nearly lost the company. And for a time, himself." Clara's hands tightened around her cup. "And now she's back." Eleanor's gaze sharpened, though her voice stayed calm. Not because he trusts her, but because he's trying to prove he isn't afraid of her anymore. That he can control what once broke him. But fear disguised as control is still fear. The words landed with quiet weight. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Clara, did you think he was cruel to you this week?" Clara hesitated. "No, just distant, guarded." "Then you saw the truth," Eleanor said. "Ethan hides behind control because he's terrified of losing everything again, the company, his reputation, anyone he lets too close. That kind of fear doesn't fade. It calcifies." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "He told me I crossed a line." Eleanor smiled faintly, not in mockery, but in understanding. "And did you—" "I don't know anymore," Clara admitted. "Maybe I wanted honesty, but I pushed too hard." Eleanor studied her for a long moment, then spoke softly. "You remind me of myself at your age. Brave enough to speak truth, but too proud to forgive imperfection. Ethan doesn't need someone to fix him. Clara. He needs someone who sees him and stays anyway." Clara swallowed, eyes stinging. "That's easier said than done." "Of course," Eleanor said, sipping her coffee. "Love always is." The rain thickened outside, tapping against the window like a heartbeat. For a moment, neither spoke. The cafe's quiet hum filled the space, the sound of spoons, laughter, life going on as if heartbreak were just another passing weather. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "When I confronted him, I saw how much it hurt, but I was too angry to stop. I thought I was protecting myself." Eleanor reached across the table, her hand warm over Clara's. "You were— Fear and love often wear the same mask. One builds walls to keep pain out. The other tears them down, even when it hurts." Clara blinked back tears, the truth of that sentence sinking deep. "He doesn't hate you, my dear," Eleanor continued. "If he did, he'd be fine right now. But he isn't. He's pacing his penthouse, staring at the rain, wondering how he ruined something he never meant to start." Clara gave a small, pained laugh. "You make it sound simple?" Eleanor smiled gently. "It's anything but simple. But love never was a science, even for people who measure everything." Outside, the rain softened to a shimmer. Clara looked down at her hands, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know if I believe in second chances anymore." "Then start smaller," Eleanor said. "Believe in understanding first. The rest will follow if it's meant to." Clara nodded slowly, a quiet resolve settling in her chest. Not forgiveness yet. Not hope exactly, but something between the two. When they stood to leave, Eleanor squeezed her hand once more. For what it's worth, she said, I think you're exactly the kind of woman my son has spent his life pretending not to need. Clara's breath caught. And what kind is that? Eleanor smiled. One who can see through his armor and not run from what's underneath. Back home, Clara stood by her window, the city glowing gold through the fading rain. Her reflection stared back still the same, yet not entirely. She thought of Ethan, the man who led with precision but lived in fear, who built walls not from arrogance but from old pain. And she thought of Eleanor's words, fear and love are the same walls from different sides. For the first time since the fight, Clara felt something shift inside her. The anger had cooled. What remained was clarity, the quiet, steady kind that came when truth replaced noise. Maybe love wasn't about being fearless after all. Maybe it was about being brave enough to open the door again, even knowing it might hurt. The next week, the city wore its usual disguise of rain and reflection, a world of glass and gray that revealed nothing and hid everything. But inside Clara Hayes, something had changed. The conversation with Eleanor Sterling had been like light through fog, not a solution, but a direction. She'd returned to work quietly, keeping her head down, acting as though everything were normal. Ethan was polite but distant, the kind of distance that hurt more than anger because it was careful. Victoria Hale, on the other hand, had never looked more at ease. She moved through the office like a storm disguised as calm, offering smiles that didn't reach her eyes, giving orders that sounded like suggestions. But Clara had started watching, and what she saw didn't add up. The more she reviewed the system logs from the night of the breach, the more inconsistencies she found. A series of data transfers time-stamped after the company's servers had supposedly gone into lockdown. The access credentials didn't belong to Ethan or any senior staff they traced back to a temporary external account created 3 days before the attack. Vendor authorization, Hale Systems. Admin override. Clara stared at the screen, heart pounding. The system wasn't hacked from the outside, it had been opened from within. Someone with authority, someone who knew exactly where to look. Victoria Hale. She sat back. The realization like a sudden drop in altitude. If she was right, Victoria hadn't just sabotaged the company again, she'd orchestrated the entire crisis to regain control, to reinsert herself into Ethan's life and Sterling and West's narrative. And if Clara accused her without proof, Victoria would crush her before the truth ever surfaced. That evening, Clara drove to the Sterling family estate on the edge of Lake Washington, a quiet expanse of cedar and glass, timeless as the water it overlooked. She hadn't planned on coming, but Eleanor had texted that morning, "My door is always open. Some truths need to be shared face to face." When Eleanor greeted her at the door, she was already holding 2 mugs of tea. "You look like a woman who's been carrying something heavy," she said softly. Clara hesitated, then stepped inside. The warmth of the home, soft lamps, piano music playing faintly in the background felt like exhale after weeks of tension. "I found something," Clara said finally, pulling a small USB drive from her pocket. Evidence that Victoria staged the breach. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. "Tell me everything." Clara explained the false admin account, the hidden transfers, the data paths rerouted through offshore servers before looping back into Hale Systems. It was clean, almost elegant, the kind of deception built by someone who understood both technology and human blind spots. When she finished, Eleanor was quiet for a long time. Then she said, You realize what this means? Clara nodded. If I take this to Ethan without context, he'll see it as an accusation. But if I don't, Victoria will get away with it again. Eleanor smiled faintly, a mixture of pride and sorrow. You sound like him, always torn between justice and caution. I just want the truth, Clara whispered. Then you'll need help. Eleanor crossed the room and picked up the phone. After a brief pause, she said, Ryan, I need a favor. Ryan Sterling arrived that night like a man used to secrets. Tall, relaxed, with the same sharp eyes as his brother but a softer edge. Clara remembered meeting him once at a company event, charming, irreverent. A man who made tension disappear by pretending not to notice it. Now, his expression was serious. Mom said it's important. It is, Eleanor said, handing him the drive. Clara found this. Victoria may have engineered the breach. Ryan whistled low. That would explain the sudden hero act she's been pulling. Ethan said she's been indispensable since she came back. Indispensable to what exactly? Clara said quietly. Ryan slid the drive into his laptop. Let's see what our queen of sabotage has been up to. The three of them leaned over the screen as lines of code and timestamps appeared. Ryan's brows furrowed. Well, I'll be damned. She created a shell login using a defunct vendor's credentials, funneled the breach through a dummy IP in Zurich, then helped clean it up to erase the trail. Clara's stomach twisted. She planned the fire, then showed up as the firefighter. Eleanor's voice was calm, but her eyes burned. It's what manipulators do. Cause chaos, then sell you order. Ryan sat back, thinking. If we leak this to the board, she's finished. But we'll need Ethan to sign off and he won't take it from me. He barely listens when I say the word Victoria. He will? Eleanor said quietly. When the proof comes from Clara. Clara froze. He doesn't trust me right now. Then this, Eleanor said gently, is how you remind him why he should. For the next 2 days, Clara worked in silence, cross-checking the logs, verifying the IP trail, building a clear, undeniable chain of evidence. Ryan helped remotely, feeding her technical details, while Eleanor kept Ethan occupied with family matters long enough for Clara to finalize her case. By the third evening, she had everything: screenshots, log histories, even a digital signature matching Victoria's old Hail Systems account. But she wasn't the only one who'd been watching. That night, as she packed her laptop into her bag, her office phone rang. No caller ID. Working late again. The voice on the line was smooth, familiar, chilling. Clara froze. Victoria. A soft laugh. You're persistent, I'll give you that. Always digging where you don't belong. What do you want? Clara demanded. To save you the trouble, Victoria said lightly. Because if you think you're the first person to try to expose me, you're mistaken. The others didn't end up well. Clara's pulse quickened. You orchestrated this breach, didn't you? You should be careful with accusations, Victoria replied. Especially when you don't understand the game. I understand enough. Oh, I doubt that, Victoria said, voice lowering. See? Ethan may admire your integrity, but integrity doesn't win wars. Strategy does. And you, dear, are playing checkers on my chessboard? The line went dead. Clara stood there for a long moment, her hand trembling slightly around the receiver. Then she whispered to herself, Not this time. She tucked the drive deep into her coat pocket and walked toward the elevator. The office was dark now, empty except for the hum of machines. But she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching the reflection of her own fear mirrored in the glass walls around her. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped inside and exhaled, determination hardening where fear had been. This time, she wasn't running. This time, she had the truth, and she wasn't afraid to use it. Monday morning arrived with unnerving stillness. The rain had stopped, but the air at Sterling and West was charged sharp, metallic, like the seconds before lightning strikes. Everyone sensed it, though no one knew why. At exactly 9 o'clock, an email flashed through every executive's inbox: urgent mandatory meeting, boardroom, 9:30 a.m., attendance required, no details, no sender listed, just the company's encrypted scheduling system. Clara Hayes read it twice, her heart steady but heavy. She knew what it meant. The confrontation had arrived. She slipped the USB drive into her jacket pocket and took a deep breath. This is it, she told herself. No turning back now. The boardroom was already crowded when she entered. The table gleamed like a mirror under the recessed lights, each reflection sharper than the people casting them. Ethan stood at the head, posture rigid, expression unreadable. Victoria Hale was beside him, immaculate as ever in a slate blue suit, her smile poised, her eyes cold. Ah, Ms. Hayes, Victoria said smoothly as Clara entered. Just in time. We were about to begin. Clara nodded once, keeping her tone even. I wouldn't miss it. Ethan looked at her briefly, almost searchingly, but said nothing. Victoria turned to the group, her voice clear, practiced. We've discovered evidence suggesting that confidential client data was mishandled following the breach. Preliminary traces point to internal activity. A murmur rippled through the room. Clara froze, realizing what was happening. She's doing it first, Victoria continued, unfolding a printed report. Certain recovery files were accessed and copied outside of authorized hours last week. The digital signature matches Miss Hayes' credentials, gasps and whispers. The board members exchanged glances, scandal written in their silence. Clara's pulse thundered. That's a lie. Victoria tilted her head. Is it the logs don't lie? Unless, of course, you've decided to modify them again. Ethan's voice cut in, low and sharp. Enough. Victoria glanced at him, feigning innocence. I'm only presenting facts. Ethan, you of all people understand the cost of misplaced trust? Something flickered across his face. Pain. Maybe? Or anger? But it was gone before Clara could read it. I didn't alter anything, Clara said, forcing her voice to stay calm. I was investigating, and I found the truth you don't want anyone to see. Victoria gave a light laugh. That's convenient. A last-minute confession dressed up as integrity. Clara's hand trembled slightly as she reached into her jacket pocket and placed the USB drive on the table. You're right about one thing. Victoria, the logs don't lie. She looked at Ethan. May I? He hesitated, torn between the weight of accusation and the ghost of trust still lingering between them, then gave a single nod. Clara walked to the screen at the front of the room and plugged in the drive. The monitors flickered to life, lines of code filling the screen in pale green. Her voice steadied as she spoke. These are the access records from the night of the breach. Every log, every timestamp, every system handshake. What you'll notice here, she highlighted a line, is an external login originating from Hale Systems 3 days before the supposed hack. A new administrator account created using a defunct vendor ID. She clicked again. The data expanded, revealing a trail of IP addresses looping through offshore servers before returning to Sterling and West. "This is the digital footprint of whoever orchestrated the breach," Clara said. "And it doesn't belong to me." The room was silent now, all attention locked on the screen. Then she turned to Victoria. "It belongs to you." A collective intake of breath. Ethan's head snapped toward Victoria. "Is that true?" Victoria's face remained composed, but her voice slipped into that soft, performative calm that predators use right before the kill. "Ethan, this is absurd. She's fabricating evidence. She's trying to cover her tracks." Clara clicked again. The final slide appeared, a digital signature embedded in the metadata of the admin account, user ID vhale801. The silence broke like glass. "She didn't just cover her tracks," Clara said. "She built the entire maze." Victoria's mask faltered. "You don't understand." "Oh, I do?" Clara cut in, voice rising. "You sabotaged this company, then sold yourself as the solution. You wanted to make him depend on you again. You couldn't stand that he'd rebuilt without you." Ethan stared at Victoria, eyes dark with disbelief. "Tell me she's lying." Victoria stepped forward, her composure finally cracking. "You think I wanted to hurt you? I saved you from ruin once everything I did was for us." "There is no us," he said quietly. "Not anymore." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the overhead lights. Victoria's voice trembled, anger bleeding into desperation. "You think she's any different? Ethan, you think she won't use you too? Look at her. She's already halfway to taking my place." Ethan didn't look away from her. "No, she's nothing like you." That was the moment the last mask broke. Victoria's expression hardened. "Then you'll regret this," she said, her voice low, venomous. "Both of you." Ethan turned toward the door. "Security?" Two guards appeared, almost instantly summoned. It seemed by instinct or preparation. "Please escort Ms. Hale off the premises," Ethan said. She tried one last glance at him, one last silent plea, but his eyes were cold now, unflinching. As the guards led her away, Victoria paused beside Clara. Her voice was a whisper, only Clara could hear. "You think you've won. You've only seen half the game." Then she was gone. The boardroom exhaled. The tension dissolved into scattered murmurs, disbelief, relief, and the rustle of papers being gathered. Ethan remained standing, one hand braced against the table, the other pressed to his temple. For the first time since Clara had known him, he looked genuinely shaken not by anger, but by the quiet ache of betrayal coming full circle. Clara unplugged the USB and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Clara." She turned. He met her eyes, the walls between them thinner now, if not entirely gone. "You didn't just save this company," he said quietly. "You saved me from making the same mistake twice." She wanted to tell him that wasn't what mattered, that she'd done it for truth. Not for redemption, but the words caught somewhere between her heart and her pride. Instead, she nodded once, softly. "Try not to forget that this time." Then she left the room, leaving behind silence and the faint hum of a world being rebuilt, one truth at a time. Outside, the rain began again, steady, cleansing, unstoppable. The rain hadn't stopped since the boardroom imploded. It came down in steady curtains, soft enough to blur the city lights, but loud enough to fill the silence that followed truth. Clara Hayes stood on the rooftop terrace, her coat pulled tight against the chill. The skyline stretched before her like a bruise, dark clouds pressing low. the sound glimmering faintly beyond. She hadn't meant to come up here. Her body had moved on instinct, away from the noise, away from victory that felt too hollow to celebrate. She should have felt relief. She'd done everything right. Exposed Victoria, protected the company, cleared her name. But the truth had its own gravity. It never left you lighter, just clearer. She ran a hand through her damp hair and let out a slow, shaky breath. "It's over," she whispered to the rain. "Then why doesn't it feel like it?" The terrace door opened behind her, footsteps slow, deliberate. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Clara. Ethan Sterling's voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. Not commanding, not precise, just human. She turned slowly. He was standing by the door, jacket soaked from the dash through the storm, tie gone, sleeves rolled to his forearms. For once, he looked less like a CEO and more like a man stripped of armor. "I figured you'd be here," he said softly. "You shouldn't be," she replied, though without conviction. "You've got a board to reassure, investors to calm." "I did," he said. "Now I need to talk to you." Clara crossed her arms, bracing herself. About what Ethan hesitated, searching for words, about everything. He took a few steps closer. Raindrops glinted on his hair, on the curve of his jaw. "You were right," he said finally. "About Victoria. About me." She stayed silent, watching him. "I've been leading with fear," he continued. "Since the day she betrayed me, I've been building walls and calling it discipline. I thought control was the same as strength. It isn't." Clara exhaled, her voice quiet but firm. "Control is what you build when you don't trust anyone else to keep you safe." His gaze lifted to hers, raw and steady. "And trust is what I lost the day I believed that loving someone was the same as surrendering." He let the rain fall between them for a moment before speaking again. "When you walked into that boardroom today, I saw it what courage actually looks like. Not power, not fear, just truth." Her throat tightened. "You think truth fixes everything?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "But it's the only place worth starting from." Clara looked away, the city shimmering through rain. "I wanted to believe in you, Ethan, but every time I did, something reminded me why I shouldn't." Victoria's voice, the rumors, that photo. It felt like the universe was warning me not to be the fool again. Ethan stepped closer, not enough to touch, but enough that she could feel his warmth in the cold air. "You're not a fool, Clara. You're the only one in that building who's ever told me the truth, even when it cost you." She gave a faint, humorless laugh. "It did cost me. I know," he said softly. "And I'm sorry." The words hung there simple, sincere, heavier than they should have been. Clara turned toward him, her expression softer now. "Do you even know what you're apologizing for not trusting you?" he said without hesitation. "For letting my past dictate every decision I made, including you. I thought I was protecting you from people like Victoria. But really, I was protecting myself from feeling anything real." She studied him, searching for the old defensiveness, the cool precision that had once been his shield. It wasn't there. "You can't protect what you won't trust," she said quietly. "And you can't love someone while you're still fighting ghosts." His eyes met hers, steady, open, stripped of everything but truth. "Then maybe it's time I stop fighting." The rain thickened, blurring the city into streaks of silver and gold. Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness yet. Not fully, but understanding. She stepped closer, their reflections merging in the slick glass wall behind them. You don't get to rebuild everything overnight, she said. Trust doesn't work that way, no, I know. But if you mean what you said, she hesitated, her voice catching, then maybe we can start again. Not as what we were, but as who we are now. Ethan's lips parted not for argument, not for persuasion, but for something quieter. That's all I want. They stood in silence, the rain falling heavier, colder. Around them, the city hummed on indifferent to their small, fragile truce. For a moment, neither moved. They didn't need to. The apology had done what touch couldn't. It had softened the air between them. Finally, Clara spoke, her tone gentle but resolute. I don't need promises, Ethan, just proof. He nodded, voice low. Then I'll spend however long it takes giving you that. A faint smile touched her lips. We'll see. He smiled too. The kind that didn't need words, the kind that said he understood. They stood side by side, watching the rain streak across the city. No grand gestures, no kiss. Just two people who had finally stopped pretending they weren't afraid. When Ethan finally turned to go, he paused at the door. Clara, he said softly, for what it's worth, I've never admired anyone the way I admire you. She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, then don't admire me. Just meet me halfway. He nodded once, then disappeared inside, leaving her alone with the sound of rain and the faint echo of hope. Clara tilted her head back, letting the water touch her face, the coolness grounding her. For the first time in weeks, her chest didn't feel tight. The city lights blurred through the drizzle, beautiful and uncertain, just like what waited ahead. And for now, that was enough. When truth finally breaks the surface, it doesn't do so quietly. By the following week, the glass towers of Sterling and West gleamed brighter than they had in months, but beneath that polished calm ran the current of chaos only justice can stir. The FBI had moved swiftly once Ethan turned over Clara's findings. Hale Systems servers were seized, assets frozen, and Victoria Hale's name spread across every financial headline from Seattle to New York. Former executive consultant arrested for cyber fraud and corporate sabotage. The words looked strange on paper, too cold for what they meant. To Clara Hayes, it wasn't victory so much as release, the final unmasking of the lie that had nearly devoured the company and, in quieter ways, her own belief in fairness. The office buzzed with relief and disbelief in equal measure. Conversations were no longer whispers, but open talk, gratitude, apology, even laughter returning to corridors that had held only tension. But still, whenever Clara walked through those halls, heads turned, some out of respect, some out of guilt. She didn't bask in it. She never had. Instead, she worked quietly, relentlessly making sure every system was sealed, every vulnerability accounted for. Ryan Sterling sent her a simple message one morning. You did good, Hayes. Ethan owes you more than flowers. She'd smiled at that, but said nothing in return. The press conference came 3 days later. The board insisted it was necessary transparency, accountability, the restoration of confidence. But Ethan Sterling had insisted on one addition to the agenda that no one else expected. Clara hadn't planned to attend. She preferred the shadows, the work behind the curtain. But when his assistant called to tell her Ethan had requested her presence, she found herself standing in the wings of the Sterling and West atrium, heart pounding against her ribs. Cameras flashed from every angle. Reporters filled the lower floor, their questions a low, hungry hum. Ethan stood at the podium in a charcoal suit, his tie a deep, steady blue, the same color as the one he'd worn the night they met. He looked composed, but Clara recognized the tension in the set of his shoulders, the calm before courage. "Good afternoon," he began, voice even, steady. "As many of you know, Sterling and West was the target of a sophisticated cyber attack designed to compromise sensitive client data. Over the last several weeks, we have worked closely with federal authorities to uncover the source." He paused. The silence electric. "That source," he continued, "was an individual formerly contracted by this firm, someone we trusted, who exploited that trust for personal gain. I won't name her today. The law will speak for itself. But I will say this, we would not be standing here without one person's integrity." The room shifted, every camera lens turning slightly. Clara's stomach dropped. Ethan's eyes found hers in the crowd. "Ms. Clara Hayes," he said clearly, "our senior analyst." When others looked away, she followed the evidence. She exposed what everyone else refused to see. Her commitment to truth, even at great personal cost, protected this company, its people, and its name. The murmurs swelled. Flashes strobed across the room. Clara wanted to disappear. But Ethan wasn't finished. "I've worked in this industry for 2 decades, he said, his tone deepening. "And I can tell you, intelligence is easy to find. Integrity is not. Miss Hayes represents what Sterling and West stands for: resilience, honesty, and the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard." There it was, the full weight of redemption, not through apology, but through recognition. Clara blinked back the sudden heat behind her eyes. Ethan continued, turning his attention to the press. "This company has learned painful lessons about transparency and trust. I have learned them personally. Going forward, our focus is rebuilding not from fear, but from faith in the people who earn it." The applause started softly, then grew. Cameras flashed brighter now, but Clara barely heard any of it. She only saw Ethan standing not as the man behind the glass walls, but as someone who had finally stepped out of them. Afterward, the press release spread like wildfire. Headlines praised the company's recovery, the uncommon courage of the woman who'd exposed the scheme. Emails flooded Clara's inbox, congratulations from colleagues, even apologies from those who had once whispered. But what mattered most wasn't the attention. It was the quiet way Ethan sought her out that afternoon. After the crowd had gone and the atrium had emptied, he found her by the north window, her reflection framed against the skyline. "I didn't warn you I'd mention you," he said. "I hope that was all right." She turned, managing a small smile. "You didn't have to. I did," he replied. "People needed to know the truth, and so did I." She searched his face, seeing not the CEO now, but the man Eleanor had described, still learning how to live without his armor. "You've changed," she said softly. He smiled, faint but real. "I'm trying. Turns out it's harder to rebuild trust than a business plan." Clara glanced out the window. The rain had stopped at last, sunlight spilling across the sound like something sacred. "Rebuilding starts small," she said, "step by step." He nodded, "And maybe this time, with the right person beside me." Their eyes met, quiet, steady. No grand declarations, no sudden music. Just 2 people who had walked through the same fire and come out on the other side, scarred but standing. By evening, the office began to empty. The buzz of conversation faded, replaced by the soft hum of machines and the faint percussion of rain beginning again. Clara lingered at her desk, closing out the last report of the day. She thought of everything that had happened, the fear, the betrayal, the late-night confessions, and hard-won clarity. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She was living even if she didn't yet know what came next. Her phone buzzed once. A new message. Ethan, dinner? Not business, just gratitude. She smiled. Typing back simply, we'll see. Outside. The city glowed clean, rinsed by rain and truth. Inside. The walls of Sterling and West finally felt lighter. Not because they'd been rebuilt, but because the people inside had stopped pretending they were unbreakable. The farmhouse sat on a gentle rise overlooking a field of wildflowers, the kind that swayed like slow music when the breeze passed through. It was early spring, the kind of day Seattle rarely offered sunlight soft, clouds lazy, the world washed clean after rain. Clara Hayes stood on the porch, a mug of coffee in hand, watching the mist lift off the valley below. The air smelled faintly of pine and wet soil. From inside came the distant hum of a kettle, and the sound of a man humming off-key to the radio, a sound she'd grown to love. A year had passed since the chaos, a year since boardrooms and breaches and betrayals had defined their days. Now, her days were different, smaller, quieter, but infinitely more her own. She'd left Sterling and West 6 months after the investigation ended. Not in anger, not even in disillusionment, just in peace. I've done my part, she'd told Ethan, her voice steady. Now I want to build something that feels like life, not survival. And she had Hayes and Sterling Consulting, a small firm on the edge of downtown specialized in helping small, family-owned businesses manage their finances ethically and sustainably. No skyscrapers, no shareholders, just people. Her clients were bakers, mechanics, teachers starting tutoring services, the kind of lives most corporations never saw as valuable. When she'd started, she thought she'd do it alone. But Ethan had other plans. He'd sold his shares in Sterling and West not long after Victoria's sentencing, announcing that he was starting a mentorship fund for entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. Leadership, he told the press, means knowing when to pass the torch. Now, he split his time between the city and the farmhouse, his work guided less by profit and more by purpose. The man who once measured life in numbers now measured it in impact, in how many people he could help rebuild the way he once had to. Clara smiled as he appeared in the doorway, barefoot, coffee mug in hand, his hair still damp from a shower. "You're up early," he said, voice soft with the kind of ease she hadn't heard in him a year ago. "So are you?" she replied. "The city call already," he shook his head. "No, just habit. Thought I'd get ahead of the emails before the weekend. Some habits die harder than others." She teased. He grinned, leaning against the doorframe. "You're one to talk. I caught you reviewing balance sheets before breakfast yesterday." She laughed, the sound light and genuine. Old instincts. They stood there for a moment, comfortable in the silence that once used to terrify them both. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked finally. He looked out at the horizon, thinking. Sometimes. The energy, the scale of it all. He paused, then smiled. "But not enough to go back." "Same," she said. "Though I do miss the skyline." He gestured to the field, the mist dissolving under sunlight. "This one's better." Later that afternoon, the farmhouse was filled with the smell of rain and fresh bread. Ethan was outside fixing a broken gate, sleeves rolled up. A streak of dirt across his cheek. Clara watched him from the kitchen window. shaking her head at his stubborn insistence on doing things himself. The piano sat in the corner of the living room, the same upright that had once gathered dust in her old apartment. Ethan had found it in storage and had it restored as a surprise. "You once said you'd stopped playing because it reminded you of loss." He'd told her that night, softly. "Maybe it's time it reminds you of joy again." She hadn't played then. Not yet. But over time, the silence had softened, and the keys began calling her back. That evening, after dinner, the rain returned soft, rhythmic, familiar. Clara sat at the piano, the lamplight turning the room gold. Ethan lingered near the window, drying his hands on a towel. "What's this one?" he asked as she pressed a few tentative notes. She smiled faintly. "Something new. Something ours?" The melody began gently, rising and falling like conversation. The sound of forgiveness made music. Ethan leaned against the frame, listening as the notes grew into something fuller, warmer. When she reached the chorus, he recognized it, a subtle shift in tone, a rhythm that seemed almost like laughter. "It sounds familiar," he murmured. "It should," she said, glancing up at him. "It's called the Blue Tie Waltz." He laughed quietly, surprised. "You're kidding?" She shook her head. "It seemed fitting. You wore that tie the night everything started, the rain, the blind date, the mess that somehow led us here." He crossed the room slowly, the smile fading into something more tender. "Play it again," he said. She did. And as the melody filled the farmhouse, the past seemed to fold in on itself, all the boardrooms, all the rain, all the words they'd never said, finally finding their place between the notes. When she finished, Ethan placed a hand on the piano, just beside hers. "You know," he said softly, "for a song born out of chaos, it sounds like peace." She looked up at him, her expression warm, knowing. "That's the point." He leaned down, brushed a kiss across her temple, not urgent, not claiming, just grateful. Outside, the wind moved through the wildflowers again, carrying their song into the fields. Later, when the night deepened and the rain slowed to a whisper, Clara sat by the fire, a book in her lap. Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch beside her, head tilted, one arm draped across the back. She closed the book and looked at him, the man who had once lived behind walls so high no one could reach him. Now, his face was peaceful, almost boyish. She thought of Eleanor, of Ryan, of all the voices that had guided them here. She thought of fear, how it had ruled their choices, how it had disguised itself as strength. And she thought of love, how quietly it had entered, how patiently it had waited. The piano sat silent now, but the melody lingered, woven into the rhythm of rain and breath. Clara reached out, brushed a lock of hair from Ethan's forehead, and whispered mostly to herself, "We finally got it right." Outside, dawn began its slow climb over the hills. The light was soft, forgiving, the kind that made even old scars look like stories instead of wounds. And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats and rain, the Blue Tie Waltz played again, not from the piano this time, but from memory. The rain had returned, soft and deliberate, the kind that tapped against the farmhouse windows like a gentle reminder that some things, even after all this time, never really changed. It was a quiet evening. The kind made for memory. The dinner table glowed beneath the low light of the kitchen lamp. There was nothing extravagant: roasted chicken, steamed vegetables, 2 glasses of red wine. Clara Hayes had cooked while Ethan Sterling set the table, humming tunelessly to a half-forgotten melody that still made her laugh. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, and somewhere far off, a thunder roll grumbled like a tired old drum. They ate mostly in silence, but it wasn't the kind that needed filling. Theirs had become a comfortable, quiet one, stitched from understanding, not avoidance. Ethan leaned back in his chair, smiling as Clara reached for the last piece of bread. "You always go for the corner piece?" "It's the best part," she said with mock seriousness. "It has texture, character, like you," he murmured. She gave him that look, half amusement, half affection. "You're getting sentimental." "Sterling?" He shrugged, smiling. "Maybe I finally have something worth being sentimental about. After dinner." Clara cleared the dishes while Ethan slipped away to the study. She assumed he was checking emails. Old habits died hard and didn't think much of it. When she turned around a few minutes later, the lights were dimmer, the fireplace alive with a low orange glow. Ethan stood near the piano, a small envelope in his hand. "Clara," he said softly. She paused. "What's that?" He took a step closer, his expression unreadable but warm. "It's something I should have written a long time ago." He handed her the envelope. Her name was written across it in his careful, slanted handwriting, Clara Elise Hayes. Her breath caught. "You wrote me a letter. Read it," he said, out loud. "If you can." Clara hesitated, then slid a finger under the seal and opened it. The paper was thick, slightly uneven, his handwriting looping and certain, but softer than his usual sharp pen strokes. Her voice trembled slightly as she began. "Dear Clara, I used to believe love was something that demanded perfection, that control could protect it, that distance could preserve it. Then you walked into my life and ruined that theory in the best possible way. You challenged me, terrified me, and somehow taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's courage wearing truth's face. You didn't rescue me, you made me rescue myself. When I look back, the elevator laughter, the rooftop rain, the night you walked away, I see the same thread through it all. You never stopped believing in what was real, even when I couldn't. I don't have a diamond to offer, just a promise that I'll never stop trying to be the man worthy of your trust, your honesty, and your music. So, Clara Hayes, will you let me keep walking beside you, for as long as you'll have me?" By the time she reached the end, her eyes had blurred with tears. She looked up slowly. Ethan was standing in front of her now, hands clasped. No ring, just that same blue tie she'd once teased him for wearing too often. "It's not traditional," he said softly. "But then, neither are we." Clara laughed through her tears. "You're proposing to me with a letter?" He nodded, smiling faintly. "The one thing I never gave anyone else my words. Unguarded, it seemed fitting." She wiped her cheek, her voice trembling. "You still could have gotten a ring." He chuckled. "I wanted you to say yes to me, not to a diamond." She folded the letter carefully, holding it to her chest. The rain outside grew steadier, filling the pauses between their breaths. Ethan took her hands gently in his. "Clara, I don't want a grand wedding or headlines or perfect timing. I just want this. You, the laughter, the stubbornness, the quiet mornings and burnt toast. I want the ordinary days with you, the ones that never make it into stories, but make life real." Her tears came again, this time not from pain, but from the quiet, overwhelming recognition that this was what love was supposed to feel like. She stepped closer until there was no space left between them. Her voice came out as a whisper. Yes. He blinked. Yes, yes, she said again, smiling through tears. To the letter, to the man, to all of it. Ethan exhaled, the tension leaving him in a single, unsteady breath. He didn't rush to embrace her. He just looked at her, memorizing her face, the way a man does when he knows this is the moment everything shifts for good. Finally, he reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face. You just made me the happiest man in this state. She laughed softly, resting her forehead against his. You say that now? Wait until you see what my firm's spreadsheets look like next quarter. He smiled against her cheek. I'll take my chances. They stood there like that, the fire crackling softly, the letter still warm between her hands. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but not threatening, more like applause from the sky. Later, when the rain eased into a drizzle, Clara sat at the piano again. Ethan leaned against the frame, watching her with the same reverence as always. This one's new, she said, her fingers brushing the keys. It's called The Letter He Never Sent. He raised a brow. But I did send it, she smiled. You did. But it took you a lifetime to learn how. The melody that followed was slow, tender, full of space, the sound of walls falling quietly instead of breaking. When she finished, she turned to him, and he crossed the room to pull her into his arms. No fireworks, no orchestras, just two hearts finely aligned in the same rhythm, steady, honest, unguarded. The fire dimmed, the rain fell again, and somewhere in the distance, the night carried their laughter through the open fields, a promise, written not in ink or diamond, but in something far more enduring peace. The day was fading into that quiet hour between gold and dusk, the kind of light that made everything seem softer, as though the world itself was exhaling. The farmhouse porch creaked gently beneath the weight of two rocking chairs. A faint breeze carried the scent of rain and cedar, and from inside came the distant hum of piano keys, a familiar melody drifting through the open window, the blue tie waltz. Clara Hayes leaned back, her fingers still faintly stained from the ink of the day's paperwork. Beside her, Ethan Sterling rested a hand along the armrest, his tie loose, his expression calm. They didn't speak for a long time. They didn't have to. The sunset unfolded slowly before them, streaks of copper and rose melting into the horizon. The same rain that had once trapped them in boardrooms and elevator shafts now shimmered on the grass like glass beads. Clara took a slow breath, watching the color spill across the sky. You ever think about how far we've come? Ethan smiled. Every day. Does it ever feel unreal? He turned to look at her. No, just rare. She smiled softly. Rare's a good word for it. A few more notes floated from the piano, not polished, not perfect, but sincere. The song had become their story's heartbeat. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Do you remember the night of the fire drill? She laughed. You mean the false alarm that trapped us in an elevator? That's the one, he said, chuckling. If someone told me then that I'd end up here, sitting on a porch in the middle of nowhere, I'd have called them insane. And yet, she said, teasing, you're here? Voluntarily. Because of you? She looked over at him, the man who had once hidden behind glass and titles now at peace in the open air. The man who'd finally learned that power meant nothing without honesty, and that love meant everything, even when it terrified you. I used to think success was safety, Ethan said after a pause, that if I controlled every variable, nothing could hurt me. But control isn't peace. It's just fear pretending to be strength. Clara nodded, And fear doesn't build a life. It just keeps you from living one. The sun slipped lower, painting their faces in gold. "Do you ever miss the city?" he asked. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not the noise, not the pretending." He smiled. "No more pretending. No more pretending," she echoed. They sat in silence again, listening as the piano shifted into a slower refrain, the melody softer now. Wistful, Ethan closed his eyes, letting it wash over him. "You know," he said quietly, "that song, it sounds like forgiveness." Clara looked out at the horizon. "Maybe it is." A narrator's voice, calm, steady, reflective, fades in over the sound of rain and piano. There's a moment in every life when you're asked to choose between fear and love, between control and trust. Some call it fate, some call it foolishness. But maybe it's simply courage, the quiet kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that whispers, "Stay, try again." Clara Hayes chose to stay. Ethan Sterling chose to try. And together, they learned that love isn't a single moment of passion. It's the collection of small, stubborn choices to keep showing up. It's admitting that success without meaning is emptiness, that safety without connection is a cage, that sometimes the greatest risk you'll ever take is to believe in something real. The screen fades slowly, the sound of the piano lingering. Rain soft against the roof. On the porch, Ethan reaches for Clara's hand, their fingers intertwining without ceremony, without need for words. Clara leans her head lightly against his shoulder. The last sliver of sun slips beneath the trees, leaving behind the kind of quiet that feels like grace. So, dear listener, if it were you sitting there, watching that sunset, would you have made the same choice? Would you have risked everything for something real? A question, not for the mind, but for the heart. Because in the end, life will always offer you two paths, the one that feels safe and the one that feels true. And maybe, just maybe, courage is simply this: choosing love again and again, even when you don't know how the story ends. The piano plays the final bars of the Blue Tie Waltz. One last note lingers clear, unhurried, before fading into the hush of twilight. Thank you for listening to Clara and Ethan's story, a story of fear, forgiveness, and the courage to choose love. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to let us know in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe for more tales that remind us what it means to be human. Until next time, keep choosing love. In the end, Clara and Ethan's story isn't just about romance, it's about courage. The courage to open your heart after it's been broken. The courage to tell the truth, even when silence feels safer. And the courage to believe that love, at any age, is not weakness, but strength in its most human form. We spend much of our lives chasing security money, control, reputation, only to learn that these things cannot hold us when the nights get quiet. What truly saves us are the moments of honesty, forgiveness, and connection we dare to share. Clara taught us that protecting your heart can keep you safe, but it can also keep you lonely. Ethan showed us that success means nothing if it costs you your peace. Together, they remind us that love is not about perfection or youth. It's about choosing vulnerability over pride, again and again. So wherever you are in life, don't let fear build your walls. Let kindness, truth, and courage become your home instead. Because it's never too late to love and never too late to start living with an open heart. Thank you so much for spending your time with Shining Stories. We hope Clara and Ethan's journey reminded you that love, forgiveness, And courage never grow old. They only grow deeper. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories to life, stories that heal, inspire, and remind us what it truly means to be human. Until next time, keep shining, keep feeling, and keep believing in love.